Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our next installment of our Red Hen Press Reading and Conversation series. I'm Monica Fernandez.
And I'm Toby Harper.
And we are incredibly excited to bring this conversation to you this evening. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Toby and I are broadcasting from is the occupied and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Kizh people. These people were rich in culture and were greatly connected to the earth and nature. They had many creation myths, such as the origin of the earthquakes. Loosely paraphrased, the story says that the Great Spirit lined up a turtle and its 6 brothers, north to south and east to west, and started building land on their backs, requesting that they not move. The turtles began to argue and started swimming away, causing the land to crack and move, thus earthquakes, appropriate for us down here around the San Andreas Fault. You can read the full tale from an archived version of this webpage in the comments below. And if you have any other creation myths or favorite native stories, please let us know. Tonight's event will take you into the minds of 3 incredible poets. I have been looking forward to this conversation all week. To kick off the event, please welcome the incomparable, the awesome, Douglas Manuel.
Oh my goodness, y'all gonna have me smiling all day. Thank you for those compliments. I appreciate it so very much. I'm so happy to be here. So my dear friends, tonight my job is to be the MC and the moderator of this incredible event. So first things, I'm going to tell you how everything's going to go tonight. We're going to start off with a beautiful reading from Ellen Bass. Then after Ellen reads for 8 to 10 minutes, we are going to have Jason Schneiderman come up. So before we get into that, I want to give a little bit of an introduction to both of them because I don't want to interrupt their reading by having a break in between. So they're just going to read straight through. So I'm going to actually introduce both of them first. Then they're going to start reading, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A, for our conversation, rather. Sorry. And our conversation is going to be about lineation, sound work, form, craft, and prosody. So, my friends, here comes an introduction. As a poet who finds himself always writing about dark, wounding, sad sack subject matter, I've always admired Ellen Bass's talent for being able to find and promote the gorgeous glory of the world while not turning her back to the filth and the muck of it. Bass's work has a way of spotting the poetry, the world-wise truth in any mundane activity, like walking a dog, cooking a pork chop, or getting into bed at night. With a poetic voice that is as soothe and as cathartic as a warm bath, the speaker of Indigo insists on tenderness and has a heart and a poetic vision large enough to hold the things we see right in front of us and the things hiding right where we're looking. Now for Jason's awesome work as well. Here we go. With poems that are emotive in their vulnerability and lyrical in their delivery, while also being talky and discursive, Jason's work displays thought in action and really performs as though his speaker's brain is on the page. Diverse and formal execution, Hold Me Tight, examines how narratives outside of ourselves become woven inside of ourselves. And our whole meaning of system making and meaning making, so much so that we can't tell where our own stories begin and where those outside of us end. His great achievement in this text is how it can be so brutally insightful and smart, yet so real, so corporeal, and so of the body and the heart. My dear friends, please help me to welcome these awesome poets.
Thank you, Douglas, and thank you all who made this happen. Douglas and Jason and I have started this conversation through email, and I've gotten more and more engaged, and I know when it's over tonight, I'm really not going to want it to be over because I'm really loving this conversation and learning so much, and I'm happy that all of you are going to be here taking part in it. I'm going to read a few poems that I chose in part because there were some things about form that I thought might be part of our conversation. And the first one is called The Small Country. Unique, I think, is the Scottish tartle, that hesitation when introducing someone whose name you've forgotten. And what could capture cafuné, the Brazilian Portuguese way to say, running your fingers tenderly through someone's hair? Is there a term in any tongue for choosing to be happy? And where is speech for the block of ice we pack in the sawdust of our hearts? What appellation approaches the smell of apricots thickening the air when you boil jam in early summer? What words reach the way I touched you last night, as though I had never known a woman, an explorer, wholly curious to discover each particular fold and hollow, without guide, not even the mirror of my own body. Last night you told me you liked my eyebrows. You said you never really noticed them before. What is the word that fuses this freshness with the pity of having missed it? And how even touch itself cannot mean the same to both of us, even in this small country of our bed, even in this language with only 2 native speakers. This next poem is called Because. Because the night I gave birth, my husband went blind. Hysterical, I guess you'd call it. Because there'd been too many people, and then there was no one. Only this small creature, her tiny cry no bigger than a sequin. Because I'd been pushing too many hours, even with her soft skull plates shifting, the collar of my bones too slender. When I reached down, I could feel the wet wisps of hair of this being living inside me, but her heart was weakening. The midwife told me not to push on the way to the hospital, but I pushed anyway. This was California in the 70s, and I'd have pushed until I died. The doctor asked for permission to cut my perineum. So polite, as though he were requesting the pleasure of the next dance. Then he slid in forceps skillfully, not a scratch on her temples. But we left that haven the same night because my husband didn't believe in hospitals. The baby naked, wrapped only in a blanket, because we both believed in skin to skin. Because the baby cried but wouldn't suck. Because when I started to stand, I started to faint, so I had to crawl to the sterile diapers and pale yellow sleeper folded inside the brown paper bag I baked in the oven. Because I'm still there, on my hands and knees, deflated belly and ripe breasts, huge dark nipples, tearing open the stapled bag, fumbling the ducky pins. 2 fingers slipped between the baby's belly and the thick layers of cotton, the sharp point. The baby, a stranger, yet so strangely familiar, flecks of blood still stuck to her scalp. Because my husband slept beside me and I let him sleep. Because it would be years before I left him. Now love and grief would be greater than I ever imagined, rooted together like north and south, over and under. Because I too had been pushed out into another world. I lay there with the baby whimpering in my arms, both of us wide awake in the darkness. This next poem is from a previous book. Those 2 were from my most recent book, Indigo, and this one was from my previous book, Like a Beggar. And it arose because my wife and I had become increasingly concerned about the way the meat that we ate was raised. And we did some research, and the more we researched, the less satisfied we were. And we were fortunate to find out that a young couple that we knew were raising chickens for themselves. They had a lot of land, and they offered to raise some for us as well. And we said that would be great because we wanted them to be sustainably and humanely raised. And I didn't know anything about raising chickens. And 3 months later, we got a call, and they said that the chickens were ready to be slaughtered, and did we want to help do that? And I said yes, because I felt that if I was going to eat something, I should be willing to kill it. So I did that, and then I was very curious about my experience, which is the place that poems come from for me. The richest place they come from is when I have an authentically genuine curiosity. And so this poem is called What Did I Love? What did I love about killing the chickens? Let me start with a drive to the farm as darkness was sinking back into the earth, the road damp and shining like the snail's silver ribbon in the orchard with its bony branches. I loved the yellow rubber aprons and the way Janet knotted my broken strap, and the stainless steel altars we bleached, Brian sharpening the knives, testing the edge on his thumbnail, all 88 Cornish hens huddled in their crates, wrapping my palms around their white wings, lowering them into the tapered urn. Some seemed unwitting as the world narrowed. Some cackled and fluttered, some struggled. I gathered each one, tucked her bright feet, drew her head through the kill cone's sharp collar, her keratin beak, and the rumpled red vascular comb that once kept her cool as she pecked in her mansion of grass. I didn't look into those stone eyes. I didn't ask forgiveness. I slid the blade between the feathers and made quick crescent cuts, severing the arteries just under the jaw, blood like liquor pouring out of the bottle. When I see the nub of heart later, it's hard to believe such a small star could flare like that. I lifted each body, bathed it in heated water until the scaly membrane of the shanks sloughed off under my thumb. And after they were tossed in the large plucking drum, I loved the newly naked birds, sundering the heads and feet neatly at the joints, a poor man's riches for golden stock, slitting a fissure, reaching into the chamber, freeing the organs, the spill of intestines, blue-tinged gizzard, the small purses of lungs, the royal hearts, easing the floppy liver carefully from the green gallbladder, its bitter bile, and the fascia unfurling like a transparent fan. When I tug the esophagus down through the neck, I love the suck and release as it lets go, then slicing off the anus with its gray pearl of shit. Over and over, my hands explore each cave, learning to see with my fingertips, like a traveler in a foreign country, entering church after church. In every one, the same figures of the Madonna, Christ on the cross, which I'd always thought was gore, until Marie said to her it was tender, the most tender image. Every saint and political prisoner, every jailed poet and burning monk. But though I have all the time in the world to think thoughts like this, I don't. I'm empty as I rinse each carcass, and this is what I love most. It's like when the refrigerator turns off and you hear the silence. As the sun rose higher, we shed our sweatshirts and moved the coolers into the shade. But other than that, no time passed. I didn't get hungry. I didn't want to stop. I was breathing from some bright reserve. We twisted each pullet into plastic, iced and loaded them in the cars. I loved the truth, even in just this one thing, looking straight at the terrible, one-sided accord we make with the living of this world. At the end, we scoured the tables, hosed the dried blood, the stain blossoming through the water. And this last poem that I'll read is called Enough, and it begins with an epigraph from Rimbaud. Enough seen, enough had, enough. No, it will never be enough. Never enough wind clamoring in the trees, sun and shadow handling each leaf. Never enough clang of my neighbor hammering, the iron nails, relenting wood, sound waves lapping over roofs. Never enough bees purposeful at the throats of lilies. How could we be replete with the flesh of ripe tomatoes, the unique scent of their crushed leaves? It would take many births to be done with the thatness of that. Oh, blame life that we just want more. Summer rain, mud, a cup of tea, our teeth, our eyes, a baby in a stroller, another spoonful of creme brulee, sweet burnt crust crackling, and hot showers. Oh, lovely, lovely hot showers. Today was a good day. My mother-in-law sat on the porch eating crackers and cheese with a watered-down margarita. And though her nails are no longer stoplight red and she can't remember who's alive or dead, still, this was a day with no unstoppable weeping. Last night, through the small window of my laptop, I watched a dying man kill himself in Switzerland. He wore a blue shirt, and snow was falling onto a small blue house, onto dark needles of pine and fir. He didn't step outside to feel the snow on his face. He sat at a table with his wife and drank poison. Online, I found a plastic bag complete with Velcro and a hole for a tube to a propane tank. I wouldn't have to move our Weber. I could just slide down the stucco to the flagstones where the healthy weeds are sprouting through the cracks. Maybe it wouldn't be half bad to go out looking at the yellowing leaves of the old camellia. And from there, I could see the chickens scratching, if we still have chickens then. And yet, this little hat of life, how will I bear to take it off when I can still reach up? Snug woolen watch cap, lacy bonnet, yellow cloche with the yellow veil. I wore the Easter I turned 13 when my mother let me promenade with Tommy Spagnola on the boardwalk in Atlantic City. Oxygen, oxygen, the cry of the body. But there may come a day when I must say no, enough, enough, with more tenderness than I have ever given to a lover, the gift of the nipple hardening under my fingertip. More tenderness than to my newborn when I held her still streaked with my blood. I'll say the most gentle refusal to this dear dumb animal and tighten the clasp around my throat that once was kissed and kissed until the blood could no longer rest in its channel, but rose to the surface like a fish that couldn't wait to be caught. Thank you.
Oh, Ellen, thank you. That was really wonderful. And Doug, thank you so much for those introductions. Oh, Ellen, it's going to take me a moment. Then I'm ready, and I'll launch into my own reading. Although I think everyone needs a deep breath. That's a beautiful reading. So in thinking about what I wanted to read tonight, I was thinking about form and why I had chosen certain forms for different poems. And the first poem in my first book is a Pushkin sonnet, which is a sonnet that was a sonnet form developed by Alexander Pushkin. And at the time that I wrote this, I'd been reading a lot of Pushkin. I'd been reading Yevgeny Onegin, and this was a kind of spell where I was afraid of something happening. Sharon Olds had given a reading, and she said, there's a spell that you can do where if you write what you're afraid of, it won't happen. And so this is that poem. And the sonnet form gave me a kind of permission to speak directly about myself in a way that I hadn't been prior to this poem. The Disease Collector. Odd word, culture. As though this swab cared about art and music, loved the opera, saw the ballet russe when Nijinsky still bared his chest, could quote the Illuminata in the original Italian, as though this petri dish were a center of learning and parents wished for their children to go there, like Harvard or Yale, as though a positive answer would not pale my cheeks or force me to wholly rearrange my life around pills and doctor's visits, force me to find old lovers and tricks, warn that their bodies may too grow strange, to play the old game of who gave it to whom, gently lowering voices, alone in one's room. And then this collection, Primary Source, my first Red Hen collection, and a very formal collection, very, very concerned with form. But I wanted to read one particular poem where the sound kind of let me get away with something that maybe I couldn't have otherwise. Safer prosody, erotic errata. For syntax, say latex. For speaker, say squeaker. Alliteration is annihilation when you say barebacking bards are beguiling the bug, or gift-giving gays are gagging on gags. You miss the silence, now it's broken. You miss the ride, the subway token. Try that's no metaphor. That's my infection. Try that's no illness. That's my erection. Instead of anxiety, say satiety. Instead of influence, say flu-like symptoms. It's only fun when you do it too, when we do it alone, with cameras, and then share. And I wanted to read from the new collection that came out. I do not advise having a book coming out during the pandemic, but if it does happen, do it with Red Hen. And it's a poem called In Memoriam Fanny Imlay. And Fanny Imlay is Mary Shelley's half-sister. She is the older daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft. And she killed herself, as you'll hear in this poem. And what I wanted to do was get to the suicide note, but I think you'll hear kind of what formally happens that I was kind of trying to work towards in the poem. In Memoriam, Fanny Imlay, 1794 to 1816. When you ask yourself how people survived the 19th century, before soap and antibiotics, before anesthesia and electricity, remember that not all of them did. Remember Fanny Imlay in her hotel room, drafting her suicide note before drinking laudanum. Remember the innkeeper who found her corpse and tore her name from the bottom of the note so she could be buried in Christian ground. Remember Fanny Imlay's final words, offering the blessing of forgetting that such a creature ever existed as I, remainder torn away. And I'm going to close with a new poem. I actually changed my mind while I was listening to Ellen Reid, and I realized that there is a poem that I've been working on for a really long time that Ellen was kind of reminding me of, like for 20 years. I've been trying to recreate this effect that Wyzwala Szymborska used in a particular poem. And I guess you can tell me in the comments or questions if you think I got it right. Stardust. And it has an epigraph from Joni Mitchell. We are stardust, billion-year-old carbon. Stardust. Okay, fine. So we're all made of stars, but being made of stars is no big deal. Sorry. Okay, fine. So we're all made of stars, but being made of stars is like being descended from Noah or Adam. It's no big deal if you truly believe it. And what good is it to me that our sweat is made of stardust? That the unsanitary hand dryers at my school are made of stardust in the stardust bathrooms that the nursing department can't use because it turns out the star dryers are just blowing the star feces on our star hands all over the place. What good is it to me that the train to work is a star train, or that my job is a star job, or that the star human star body contains 9 to 11 star quarts of star blood? When I was star 7, I was star woke and star gently in the early morning because my star mother was losing her star blood. She collected the star blood in star cartons, which had held the star milk I drank on my star cereal to make measurement of the blood for the star doctors at the star hospital, where she and my star father went to complete the miscarriage of her star fetus, while I went to the house of her star friend, quietly, sleepily, and I didn't even miss a star day of star school. Oh, stars. Will you listen when I tell you I remember this? Stars, it happened 5 times. Because my star mother wanted more star life. She wanted to be a mother more times than she succeeded. And she only stopped so she wouldn't die, which was a relief because I wanted her not to die. And I think it made my mother sad that I didn't want to make more lives as much as she had. And I think that's what she meant when she made me promise over and over again that I wouldn't ever hurt myself, even though I had never shown any inclination towards self-harm or suicide. And yet she brought it up over and over as though she knew something I didn't about myself. And even though I thought I knew something about her and her blood and the empty milk cartons we kept on hand for the next time she had to keep track of the blood she was losing, maybe I was wrong. 30 years later, when all those fears of her bleeding to death seemed trapped in some amber of memory, she died because her star lungs were too wet to carry the star oxygen to her star blood. I'm so sorry, Star Mother. I'm so sorry, Star Corpse. Be at peace for now in the star ground as I carry forward this star life, so star wasted on star me, the life you star wanted to make so star badly, this star life you star wanted enough to risk death for. And here I am with no star children of my own, waiting to star crawl into the star earth, saying, I'm sorry, so sorry. Thank you for this life, Star Mother. So sorry, so sorry. I just don't want it, so sorry. I just want it to be over. So sorry.
I am dying right now. The way those 2 last poems by both of y'all were in conversation, all the places. Jason, I'm so glad you made that adjustment in the schedule. Like, y'all, we did not do that on purpose. Lord have mercy. That was a lot.
Jason, that is such a moving and beautiful, gorgeously beautiful poem. I just am in awe of how you did that.
So relentless. The repetition is so relentless, that star. And then for you to create the conceit and then write it out with that again, that relentlessness of it.
It feels so natural. It feels so natural. I mean, obviously it's a device, but it doesn't feel like that. It just feels so natural. And that's very rare, I think, to be able to do something that's a kind of tour de force like that and have it feel like, no, I'm not doing this because this is a technique that I am good at handling. It's because this is the only way I can say it. It's just really beautiful.
And it's like, and that it's fresh material, that it's like, again, you've been working on it for a while, but it's not like, what you feel like prime time. Like, I know a poem's never finished, only abandoned, shout out to the symbolist, but still, like, that was like, wow. Again, it stumbled me, y'all. I couldn't think of my questions for a second. Well, let's go back to form, my dear friends. Let's go back to form.
I could not read after that wonderful poem, Ellen. So thank you. That was.
Well, I'm so glad I got you to read it.
That is beautiful.
I've done my work.
Oh Lord. Well, let me try to do mine. So the first question I want to open up with for y'all. And I think well, Jason, let's have you answer first, my dear friend, since Ellen read first. So one of the things that people always, students or anybody who finds out I write and read poetry and teach poetry for a living always ask is, how do you decide where to break a line? And so, is it by breath for you, Jason? Is it by meter? Is it by visual display on the page? Is it by line balance? Is it by meaning making possibilities? I remember when I was young in my career, like it was all about kind of just like visual display on the page and kind of playing and scoring across the page. But the longer and longer I write, all I care about is like meaning making and like how many meanings can I get and how many times can I like go like this to you as a reader when it comes to the kind of contrapuntal nature of like the syntax of the sentence and the line. So that's what I care about now. But like, what about you, man?
Well, I've been working on this very long essay about the line and the theories of the line, and I've been obsessed with the line for as long as I can remember. Because as soon as I sort of found out, and I grew up reading very formal poetry, and I did a lot of speech and debate stuff when I was, in junior high and high school, and I would win because I was reading Lewis Carroll and I was reading, these sorts of like really funny things, and I understood what I understood intuitively was that the line runs interference with the syntax, that there's a sentence intonation, and that what the line is doing is running interference with that, because we drop and raise our voices to kind of indicate when we're finished and when we're continuing. And those are sort of like the basic units. And the line is just kind of mixing that up just a little bit and kind of throwing it just a little bit off. And so when I began working in free verse, and when I was reading a lot more free verse, I was really compelled by all these theories. Denise Levertov's idea that it's, a pause just smaller than a comma. Or like, I mean, I'll go out on a limb here. I don't think that Charles Olson's idea of projective verse actually makes sense. Like I've read it many, many times, and I just don't understand the incest that gets you to the vertical. And Alan Grossman's cited singer, I actually find, even though it's a little bit bonkers, the idea that the length of the line has to do with the internality, externality, or sociality of the voice. The basic structure that the very short line is the self talking to the self. The roughly 8 to 10 syllable line is a social line, and the larger than 12 syllable line is the prophetic line, in which the speaker communicates on behalf of the collective to the collective. I actually find that holds up really well. It's sort of not falsifiable. Like you're sort of like you can't really prove it, but I do find that whenever I use that structure, it seems to work really well. But that's my real focus when I'm working, because I'm not sitting down at my desk writing and being like, oh, am I working in a prophetic moment? It's never like that. But there's the urgency, and then as I'm working, what I find challenging, what's sort of like the revision, kind of the ongoing revision as I'm working, is shaping the line to the phrase and the phrase to the line. And that's usually what I find is most important for my students, particularly the beginning students, is because they can get a phrasing or they can get a line, but they're often kind of all over the place. And if I kind of say that the line has to be shaped to the phrase and the phrase to the line, and they each have to be exerting pressure on each other, which is ultimately getting to this idea of the syntax and the line break running interference, that's kind of my linear guide for poetry construction.
No, I can dig it. And I think that what I like the most is what I was getting at about this, like that real kind of a tug between the syntax of the sentence that is being delivered and then cutting that with the line. And I know there's so many ways to think about that, like also of like thinking about each line of a poem being a poem in itself for that level of integrity. And Ellen, I like really feel that in your work, like that I can just grab any line, like open up Indigo, of course I got it right here, that I can open it up anywhere, and just read a line. And it's like really true. I have rested my head upon a baby, a stranger, just everything lifts up. That was that natural. So could you talk about, your relationship to the line and how you make those kind of lineation decisions?
Well, I appreciate what Jason is saying, and all that feels inside me. I also grew up, reading just a lot of poetry. I mean, just a lot of, in the old days when you were an English literature major, you didn't get to read as much modern poetry as I think most young people in college are reading now. So, I was back with Chaucer a lot, and moving through the centuries, and, a lot in the 18th and 19th century. And so all of that gets in your body, and I think it's fabulous. And the very first poetry writing class I took was called versification. And my wonderful teacher just wanted us to practice the forms. And it didn't have to be a good poem. It didn't even practically have to make sense. Just do the form correctly. And I'm so grateful for that, because I can't really imagine doing that kind of practice later. But I was at just the right age to just practice away. And so although I don't think of the line metrically anymore, I am unconsciously thinking of the line metrically when I don't even know I am. And thinking about coming to this workshop, I've been teaching.
Oh my goodness, we've all been on all day. Look at us, that's hilarious.
And, I think that coming to this, I just thought, okay, I wanted to read The Small Country. And I thought, well, is there anything I could say about the lines there? And I was just, this is not completely about the line, but it's about meter and the line. And I was thinking about these three lines in the poem, and the first two places where I mention these untranslatable lines, one is unique, I think, is the Scottish turtle. And I thought, well, I didn't sit down and go, I think I'm going to try and make this line metrically have this sort of feeling of the Scottish turtle, but you can hear it, unique, I think, is the Scottish turtle. I mean, there it is. And then, and it's 10 syllables, right? There it is. And then the next, when I introduce it, is, and what could capture Kafune, which you can hear is just a more tender meter, right? I mean, the first is all, but here is perfect, iambic, right? And what could capture Kafune, because you're running your fingers tenderly through someone's hair. You don't want to be turtling, that wouldn't feel as good. So, and then I looked, okay, and then what happens when we make this big jump? Last night you told me like my eyebrows, an iambic pentameter line. And I didn't say to myself, okay, I'm going to now make this leap, and I think it would really be good for it to have an iambic pentameter line, but it's just inside at a certain point. So even those of us, I think this is important, and many other people have said it, but even those of us who aren't writing in traditional forms, we're always using meter. There isn't any way to escape from meter. And the other reason that I wanted to read What Did I Love is because that lineation is really different than anything I usually do. But I had this poem, and it's about killing chickens, and it goes through all the steps. And it was obvious to me from the get-go that I had a serious challenge of how do I not make this sound like instructions for killing a chicken, or like a recipe book. And I don't think sound is my most naturally strong suit. So I thought, okay, the only way to do this is I've got to really work the sound hard. And I was familiar with Dorianne Lux's poems, in which she developed this form in which the end word of each line was a consonant that rhymed. And she wrote several short poems like that. Like one is called Men, and it's something like, it's tough to be a guy, you have to be gruff, and then there's laugh, and at the end it's standing on the edge of a wharf, so there's all of these F sounds. And I thought, well, maybe I could use that here. And I picked the R sound, but because I'm not so skilled, I gave myself a lot of leeway, and the lines could be any length. Hers were very regular. They could be, my lines could be any length, and the R could appear anywhere in the word. It didn't have to be at the end. And then I would also just have a lot of other R words. And R is an easy letter, but also in retrospect, I realized it's a soft letter. And so it mitigated the violence and the harshness of the action. And at the very end, there's a couple, if anyone looks at the poem, there's a couple lines that don't end with an R word, but it was just because the lines were wonky, and it didn't seem to me that it really mattered if it had that pattern ultimately. So I changed a few, but I just made lists and lists and lists and lists of R words, which seems unnecessary if you think how many words have R's in them, that someone who uses words a lot like me might need lists. But it was a part of that process of just sort of generating sound and generating language. And I just had pages and pages and pages, everything I read, I pick up the newspaper and just start writing down more R words. And so it gave it a kind of oral glue that I felt the poem really needed. So in that poem, I did have a deliberate strategy of making a line, although I don't think it's a strategy anyone tends to use. I'm not sure, but I recommend it. It worked. It gave the poem what it needed.
Well, what I like about that, we've been talking about Denise Levertov, of course, and that essay, Notes on Organic Form from 1965, I think, is so ingrained in all of us. And, that famous quote, that form is always, a revelation of content. I love it. I love it. I love it. And so I think you guys are getting close to that. And so, Jason, hold me tight. Hurts me. It's so good. It's so good, homie. And like the way you come out the gates with anger.
Oh,
who are you? Who are you? Who are you?
But
honestly, it's so lean. It's so tight on the page. But I was really, really intrigued by the quatrains. But the quatrains speaks to such an old form. It's such a, dare I say, stable house or stable room to build a poem upon. And of course, goes back to the ballad stanza, of course, and just seems so laced in that kind of history. But then in this context, does so many surprising things. So how'd you settle on that one? And especially for a long poem as well.
It's my friend has this story. I'm going to tell my friend Jennifer L. Knox's story about her dog. It's a little gross, but I think we're all here on this. One day she walked in and her dog had eaten a ball of yarn, and they tried to pull out the yarn and they couldn't. They realized if they did that, they were going to hurt the dog. So they took the dog to the vet, and the vet said, yeah, it's going to have to come out the other end. And so they took the dog she didn't have to watch this happen, but they, had to, it had to go all the way through. And when they brought the dog back, the dog was like, right?
Traumatized for life.
not traumatized, but like that was a lot. It was there was no stopping until we were on the other side. And that's how that poem was. It was like, okay, we're not stopping until we get to the other side. And so that poem went through a lot of shapes. I thought that it might have a really long line because it's so big. I thought that a long line would be a lot easier. And there is one stanza that has 3 lines, and I don't understand why that stanza has 3 lines.
I was going to ask you why. You already know.
And I tried really hard to have.
You ain't going to tell me? I was going to ask you.
I don't know. I can't make it be elsewise. And so with that poem, what I realized was that the pacing, because there are a number of different moods, and the poem kind of moves through these different sort of stations where it seems like one thing is happening, but then there's another kind of epiphany that revises what had come earlier. And then over and over, the poem sort of and a lot of it is that poem kind of, if making the R word list was the kind of underpainting for Ellen's poem, Lacanian psychoanalysis was the underpainting for that poem. So,
mirror anyone?
Right.
Mirror anyone?
Right. And so you're just kind of going back over and over and over. And each time it's kind of revealing this new facet. And I found that if I worked with the short enough line that it moved quickly, and a kind of stable enough stanza that it felt solid, then I could get all the way through to the other side. And it's a really demanding poem. I mean, it's a really, really demanding poem. And when I first started reading it, I was like, I think I was gonna get bored. I don't know that people want to come with me to the other side of this journey. But that shape was actually really, thank you for asking about the shape, because that actually was really important. And once I found that, I was able to kind of get all the pieces to work in order. But it was really, really difficult. And that was also, and it was also, there was a really big shift for me in that poem, because it was the first time that I not only this is probably a topic for a whole other conversation, but misreading has always been a really critical piece of my experience as a poet. So like as an undergraduate in the 1990s, like if I wrote about loss or death, I was like everything I brought into class was the Holocaust or AIDS. Like people did not know how to read me in any other way, and I was like, I wear
a minoritized body too. I know what that feels like. And everybody knows what your poem is about right when you come into the room. That's happened, I think, to all three of us.
Yeah. So it was, and I sort of made peace with it. I was like, okay, like, all right, like if that'll okay. And so with that particular poem, with anger, I kind of gave myself a certain permission to say that there were things that weren't there, to kind of say like, and actually, what I'm telling you is true, but there's also a piece that I need to keep for myself. And so that became like a really critical move within the poem, and I think the form lets me do that, because the pacing of the short line keeps you moving really quickly, and because the 4-line stanza has kind of enough solidity but still speed, it kind of gets you through to the other side.
No, I mean, I love that. It's the velocity and the stability. I'm going to say that forever. Ellen, I talked over you. I'm sorry. Jump in like double dutch.
No, it's okay. I mean, and this seems obvious, but one of the things as a reader that I think about when I look at that form is that, anger is uncontrollable. And, right, and I mean, that 4-line stanza, will kind of, maybe the 3 lines is just that it can't be totally controlled.
That's so real. That's so real.
But
That's so real.
It's very safe. You make it more safe for us as readers. This person speaking to us is not out of control, although he's talking to us about being out of control. And I felt that there was, I'm not sure this is about form, but I just want to share it. I felt like there was a lot of room for me to read myself into your poem.
Ooh. Thank you.
And I really thought that was an extraordinary thing to be able to do with such a intense subject. And maybe some of it, perhaps, I don't really know if this is true, but maybe some was the form. Maybe the form helped me as well. But I did feel like, even though many of the things you said, I wouldn't say precisely that about myself, I felt like, oh, you are talking for me. I felt very included in that poem.
No, I love that that point you made, Ellen, that like, with anger being so unruly, to like house it in the solid room of the quatrain is just so intelligent.
Yeah, I would not like to see it all over the page.
No, that's totally right. Because then it would be just unruly on unruly on unruly all the way down. Yeah, I totally get it. And so thinking about like that poem, as we just talked about, has that one tercet. And, you were so smart to say that perhaps that can, be symbolic of that form not being able to stay that stable forever. And, enough. I asked you to read it. It's amazing. That one of the things that I love the most about it, though, is that it has that break in the form, in that pattern, just like that. So you have all these, closed stanzas, and then we get to, let me make the right one, that 5th stanza that has that ellipses, and then that marriage in. And that's the only time that our stanzas aren't in stop. So, those kind of formal moves like that. And of course, I have an ideal of why, and it has to do with content, of course. Form and content go back to Levertov. But I wondered if you could talk about it too, because both of those poems pivot off of that little break in the form, Ellen.
Well, to be really honest, because I think that, probably we have a lot of people listening who write poems, and I hate to sound like I am, more aware than I am, because then it becomes, oh, those people are aware and I'm not, and so I just want to throw my hat in with all of you who are not aware of what you're doing a lot of the time, and just, hoping a lot of hoping. But and so in that vein, I didn't really ever think about that until you just said it, Douglas, that I was ending all my stanzas one way except for one stanza. So I'm just looking at it myself. And I do think it is, as you say, content. I'm saying, I could, if a time came where it wasn't a good idea to live anymore. And I didn't mean this in terms of what we think of as suicide. I really meant it as I could be heading into dementia, or I could be in an old age that just had, too much pain at that point. And, I wanted a good death and not a miserable one. And so, okay, so this is how one would do it. And yet with the ... it's hard for people to end, because you want to know, you want one more, one more of something. And so I think that and yet, that in a way, there's nothing to say about the end yet, even though the poem goes on and does.
And that's what I love, though. And it gets like one of the best figures. I mean, this little hat of life. Oh, I'm so mad at you. Oh my goodness, it's so good. Like this little hat of life. I mean, Biggie Smalls is right behind me with his crown, and makes me think of this little hat of life as well, too. Like, my goodness. And so that's why it really broke open for me, because of that ellipses, and then to go to that, I think probably the most heavy figure, a moment of figuration in the piece. And the one that, of course, because this poem also has the thatness of that, which is also just a brilliant, and that those two lines rhyme. Come on. Seriously. So again, and even though I know you were talking about not being all the way conscious, I think we can go back to this idea that y'all was talking about from the get-go, that both of you guys have internalized so much music by reading so much poetry. And so then if you read more, you can make better decisions without even noticing it. And I mean, look at all those books behind you. That's why you knew how to do that. It wasn't just because of that, I think. You know what I mean? So that kind of gets me to another idea. And I know we kind of have maybe 5 to 10 minutes left, which is insane to me, because I can talk about this all day with you guys. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about my process to try to get in the kitchen of y'all's, just really briefly, not too long, because I know this about y'all. But for me in my writing process, I journal, and I don't do any lineation whatsoever. Like my first, I'm either typing random notes in a phone or just scrawling across the page like so. Just like that. That's how all my journal stuff looks. And then I take this to the computer, and then I start playing with line. But I get really afraid once I start doing lineation, because that's when I'm for real in poetry mode. So I don't like to play with the line until way later. So I was wondering, when do you guys start playing with the line, or is it something right from the get-go? I know some folks think in lines. I can't do that. I don't think in lines. I know some people write in sentences. So I was just wanting to get in the kitchen a little bit with that, and then kind of dovetailing with that, so we can make sure that this happens too. When you do, especially for you, Jason, because you do write received and closed forms. Do you sit down and I'm writing a sonnet right now. This will be a guzzle right now, or do you look at the something as crazy as this and be there's a guzzle in there? So I know that's complicated, but to get you guys in there. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I remember years ago I was on a panel with someone who was saying I was writing this poem, and the poem was I need to be a guzzle, and I was that has never happened to me.
Me neither. And people say that shit all the time. That never happens to me.
And I teach received form, and I'm really invested. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to switch places, and you're going to be talking about teaching form. But I think that the sort of the wonderful thing about form is that there are two things. One, and I think this is the sort of useful thing for everyone, is it asks you to do something you wouldn't do otherwise. That the whole value of form is you have to have a rhyme there. You have to repeat this thing there. And so it gives you these problems to solve. I mean, it's a little bit like genre fiction or something, you know, like if you have a detective and you have a murder, you know, like, you know that you're going to watch a TV show where the detective solves the murder, but how you do that is really exciting. And so received form is always asking you to do something you wouldn't have otherwise done. And so whenever I write in received form, it's because I want to do something that I wouldn't have otherwise done. I want to be guided. The second piece is that I do think that received form, sestinas and sonnets and ghazals, make a rhetorical demand. And so like whenever I think about form, I'm not just thinking the sonnet requires some kind of call and response. There has to be some kind of approach and then turn. The sestina requires some kind of obsession. We're going to keep coming back to whatever it is. The ghazal, I actually think, is probably the most demanding for Western writers because it requires you not to be linear. The way in which the ghazal, and like my essay, I call the ghazal the broken mirror, that you're seeing all these facets reflected. It's almost like, it's like when you've been watching, you know, Western film and then you go to like montage theory and, you know, like you juxtapose the two things. And so each form, when I write in a form, yeah, like I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that now. Maybe once in a while they'll be like, oh, this would work as a sestina, but actually I've never written a sestina. No, sorry, I've never written a villanelle that works ever. Sestinas I'm good with. Villanelles I cannot to save my life. Someday I hope to get a triolet right. But I will also, I'll build on what Ellen said, and then I'll pass it to Ellen, that I think most of us write intuitively, or we compose intuitively, and then we revise intellectually, and then we're still, I mean, and I shouldn't say, it's not that neat, it's not that binary, but one of the real values of having teachers or classes or workshops or readers is that after, as the writer, you've been working intuitively with everything you've kind of internalized, to have someone else who can then say, oh, okay, so, you know, like, here's Grossman's theory of the line, and here's how it's working with this poem, and if you tried this, maybe. Or, you know, that kind of intellectual theory buildup and that kind of internalization, they really work together. And if you're sort of stronger at one or stronger at the other, like there's no there's no one way to get where you're going. The only way to get where you're going is just to keep going. I'm still going to hold you
down, though. I want to know this, Jason. I'm going to pin you down. On your original drafts, are there line breaks or not? Or does it go? My preferred paper is gridded. Because if I work on gridded paper, I can see the double margin. That's game. I'm going to throw that to my students. All right, here you go, Ellen. Here you go. Take it on home, and maybe I can think of something to say really cool after that. Or actually, I'll probably let you have the mic drop. I think I am. So yeah, bless us up. Bless us up, my dear friend.
I do both. I do both. When I work in lines, they're pretty sloppy lines. I'm not somebody who gets a line. These people just astound me, who get the line exactly right before they go on to the next line. No, never. But sometimes I work somewhat sloppily in lines, and often I don't. Although I think even when I'm writing across the page, I'm sometimes hearing it in a very subtle way, kind of hearing where the lines may be. But I will say that quite a lot of years back, when I was at a hard place in my writing, Sharon Olds gave me the advice to write in lines, and it was good for me. I'm a person who finds it very easy to get words on the page, but hard to get good words on the page. And so she gave me a few pieces of advice. I'll tell you all three of them. One was narrow the aperture through which the words come out. That was very helpful. Just, slow down, think more as you're going. Because I could spew endlessly. The other was,
we're all writing these down. Right?
Yeah, you see, we all just grabbed everything. Everybody grabbed it.
Try harder.
Oh my goodness.
Perfect. These were right for me at the time. They might not be right for a person with writer's block, who had already been trying as hard, but it was try harder. And the third one was write in lines from the beginning. And I did that for a couple of years, and then it allowed myself more freedom. But those were 3 of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten.
No, that's amazing. And I think with that, Jason, what's some advice you have been given about the line that you'd like to bless us with? Yeah. Well, no,
I was like, don't make me give advice.
How about given? That has really stuck to you like that, stuck to the wrist.
So Phyllis Levin would talk about the idea of line that comes out of Acmeism, and that's the movement of the Russian poets with Akhmatova and Mandelstam, and that the poem is a building. It's a piece of architecture. And so the line, each line is a story in your building, and it has to support the whole thing. And so that was kind of you can never have a line that's going to let your building collapse. Right?
That's nice. That's really nice.
You need to have a solid structure. And so that way of thinking about the poem, which and Phyllis told me that when I was 19, 20. Has been a really helpful way of thinking about poems, that there's an architecture, that it has to kind of exist as an object in space.
Gosh, love it. Well, my dear friends, like I said, I think I could do this forever and do it
we
for
do it
free.
again next week.
But at the same, hey, let's just hang out. I mean, I think everybody would watch, right? I mean, home, y'all, would y'all watch? Would y'all hang out with us to hear us say this? I think so. But seriously, thank you guys so much. And Ellen, thank you for reading that poem. I mean, again, I could listen to enough forever. I told you, I went through your text very quickly, but I've come back to enough again and again. And Lord have mercy, that star poem. Lord have mercy. What's the title of it, Jason? Tell me one more again. What was the title?
It's not published.
Oh, no, it is it. Well,
Stardust.
I can't wait to see it somewhere. When it does get somewhere, let me know so that I can totally link to it and teach it all the time, because I mean, it's just so relentless and just so beautiful. And the way that they were in conversation with each other was just so touching, guys. This has been awesome for me. I hope it's been awesome for y'all at home. And now I'm about to hand it back over to Toby and Monica to say goodbye, y'all. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. Seriously.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
guys so much. That was unbelievable. I could definitely watch you guys forever.
All right. Thank you for joining us. This is fantastic. All right. Don't forget for everyone who's watching, don't forget to pick up these books by these incredible poets from the link that's about to be dropped in the chat. We're actually taking a break next week, so you can watch this one again. But you can join us again on June 9th for our next Hen House event, a Hen House at Home event with 3 incredible novelists, Martha Cooley, Sadie Hoagland, and Daryl Suarez. And we'll see you right here on June 9th at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you very much. See you next time.